EastEnders at 1. First, here on BBC One, John Humphreys with On the Record.
Good afternoon. Is the government going to lose out at the polls because it seemed to be too eager to please our friends in Europe? I'll be putting that to Labour's campaign coordinator Margaret Beckett. I'll also be asking Anne Widdecombe if the NHS would really be safe in the Tories' hands. And does the government really want us all to know what they're actually up to? That's after the news, read by Liz McCain.
Good afternoon. Aid agencies are expecting hundreds more Kosovan men who've been missing for weeks to cross the border into Albania today. Yesterday, more than 500 came over the border, saying they'd been held in a Serb prison. Many had been mistreated. Clive Myrie reports.
These men can never forget what they've been through. The war in Kosovo has spawned monstrous brutality if the stories of the men of Mitrovica are to be believed. This man spoke to us but didn't want to give his name. He still has family in Kosovo.
They beat us like animal. 48 hours, we didn't have no bread, no water, just staying and waiting. Somebody was sick and calling for help to give some water. Nobody didn't give us. Then every day was calling us with names and beating every day.
Some of the women of Mitrovica who crossed the border weeks ago have been searching for their husbands and sons, fathers and brothers. Women from other parts of Kosovo desperately hoped they'd find their menfolk too. But not today. They took my brother from the tractor, she told me. We've been searching for 3 weeks to find him. We've heard rumors he's alive.
The final seal on the misery of these men would be for them never to see their relatives again. The task of trying to find loved ones begins now, and for most it will be a long and painful process. Clive Myrie, BBC News, in Northern Albania.
The Rugby Football Union are demanding urgent talks with the England captain Lawrence Dallaglio over newspaper allegations of drug taking. He's said to have admitted to the News of the World that he used to be a drug dealer and that he took drugs at a party 2 years ago.
Twickenham, the home of English rugby, was today host to a celebration of rugby's possible future stars ahead of the game between Leicester and the Barbarians. But the allegations made by a Sunday newspaper against the England captain Lawrence Dallaglio have shocked the rugby union world. The paper claims that he admitted taking the drugs ecstasy and cocaine during a party celebrating the British Lions series victory in South Africa in 1997. The newspaper also alleges that he used to deal in drugs before taking up rugby. The Rugby Football Union says the claims against the Wasps forward are being investigated as a matter of urgency. At the same time, the director of rugby at Wasps gave his reaction to the allegations.
I'm, extremely shocked and very surprised. And I think the problem I find with it is that, as a rule, he's a very, very mature guy, and he's reached the position as England captain because of that.
Meanwhile, England coach Clive Woodward, who appointed Dallaglio as World Cup skipper in October, says he won't comment until he's spoken to him. And the player's agent says he's hoping to meet the star this afternoon. Lawrence Dallaglio is due to lead England into the World Cup later this year.
The League Against Cruel Sports is mounting a new campaign to ban hunting with dogs. The League is producing posters illustrating what it says is the cruelty of the sport. They'll also be pressing the new Scottish Parliament to take the lead and outlaw hunting first. President Clinton has urged Congress to act quickly to toughen up America's gun laws before the end of the school year. He made his appeal as students at Columbine High School in Colorado celebrated their graduation, just a month after 12 of their friends and a teacher were shot dead by 2 pupils. That's it from me. There's more from the newsroom at 5:15 here on BBC One. But now it's back to John Humphreys and On the Record.
Would we have to pay more for our health care under a Conservative government?
There are no ways around it. You can't get something for nothing. And I think people have to come to accept that we will need to pay more.
I'll be asking Anne Widdecombe, the Shadow Health Secretary and star of last year's Tory conference, what she thinks. And we're about to get a Freedom of Information Bill. Will it really allow us to find out what's going on in Whitehall? But first, the European elections are almost upon us, though it's fair to say most people are managing to contain their excitement at the present. But these elections do matter, both because the European Parliament has more power than it once did, and because there is a clear divide between the main parties. Labour's problem is that it wants to go further in the direction of Brussels than the polls suggest most of us want to travel. Margaret Beckett is the Minister in charge of Labour's election campaign, and she's in our Derby studio. Good afternoon, Mrs Beckett.
Hello.
Does it worry you that you're coming across as rather too pro-European for the British public's taste?
Well, I don't think that's true, actually. I hope that what we're coming across as is the party that actually can be relied on to do the best possible job defending Britain's interests in a European Union of which the British people have chosen to be part. And that's what I would hope. And I think that's what most people in Britain do actually think. We can be trusted to do the business for them.
But you seem to be defining Britain's interest as transferring more power from Britain, putting it crudely, from Britain to Brussels.
No, we don't define it in that way at all. We define Britain's interests as getting, as all our continental partners do, the best possible deal for the United Kingdom within a framework of gradually increasing cooperation over the years. I think that the phrase that people use nowadays is that integration where necessary, but decentralisation wherever possible. Everything that can be done in the nation-state should be done in the nation-state.
Well, we know about the extra integration that you want, specifically the euro, the single European currency. It's not quite clear what you want to give up, is it? Where you want to, what you want to take back, where you want to decentralise.
No, I don't think that's true. I mean, we've undertaken an important part of decentralisation here in Britain with devolution to Scotland and to Wales. And
that's not from Brussels,
an increasing role for the English regions. No, that's right. But it's part of giving power from the centre. And as for the single currency, again, I think most people will think our stance is sensible, because we're saying it's a project that has gone ahead, it's a project that it may well be sensible for Britain to be in, but at the moment our economy is too far apart from that of the other member states who are in the euro, and so what we have to do is to work to get the right pattern so that we can go in if we should choose. But of course the decisions, not our decision, it is a decision for the British people, and when the time comes they are the people who will make it.
A few mays and ifs in that answer. The reality is that as far as Mr Blair is concerned, as far as your party leadership is concerned, the intention, and I quote, the intention is real. The support in principle. We have declared our support in principle. The intention is real. That's what Mr Blair says.
Well, I think we've struck the right balance. We're saying that in principle we don't have these principled objections that say never, you must never join the single currency. We don't say you should rush in immediately because that could damage our economy, which is what the Liberals say. What we say is yes, it would be right to join, but if you like, when it is right to join, when the economic conditions are right, and those economic conditions are real and they're important. What I think makes no sense at all is to say what the Conservatives are saying, which is not never, which would at least be logical, even though you might think it's wrong. But, well, not for 10 years, even if it is in our national interest. Now, that seems to me to make no sense at all, and it's quite clear it makes no sense to most people in the business community either.
So you do want to give up the pound?
It's not a matter of giving up the pound, it's a matter of entering a single currency when the economic conditions are right that could give considerable advantages to British business and could therefore help us to get more growth and to get more jobs, which is why most people joined in the first place.
I remember you used to say if. It's when now, isn't it?
Well, yes, it is, because I used to say if, nearly 25 years ago?
Well, you used to say no, not just if.
But that was 25 years ago, and the British people said yes. We've been in there for a long time. One of the things that we have not always done in Britain is to fight our own corner effectively as well as determinedly. That's what the Labour government is doing. That's why, for example, we managed to get the beef ban lifted. It's why we have managed to make some steps forward, although not as many as we'd like, and we'll go on pushing on reform of the Common Agricultural Policy. But we are determined to be effective advocates for Britain's national interest, and I think we're showing that we are.
And it's more than just when, isn't it? It's actually soon, because you are making the preparations for a referendum to be held early in the next Parliament. So we're only talking about 2 or 3 years away, maybe?
Well, the preparations for the referendum, in a sense, are perhaps almost the least important part of it. Part of the problem that we have at the moment is that there are a lot of technical and practical preparations that people in the business community in particular need to make, and that hadn't been begun until we came to power. And so, as a matter of fact, even if the economic conditions were met, which they're not at present, we actually are not in a position to join at the moment. And our view is that we have to prepare so that we could join if we thought it was right, and then, when the time comes, we can decide whether or not we want to go in, which again is a decision for the British people.
We're back to if again, an if crept in there, but nonetheless, what he is saying, very clear about this, early in the next Parliament. This referendum is going to happen early in the next Parliament, so we're very close to it.
Well, it could be early in the next Parliament. It depends when the economic conditions are met.
So it might not be.
We're not saying anything different, you know, from what we've been saying for quite some time.
I'm trying to clarify what you are saying, because we do
We're saying when the economic conditions are met, the government will come to a view, Parliament will come to a view, and then the British people will be asked to come to a view. But not until the economic conditions are right. And it's in Britain's interest to join.
But the referendum will or may be held early in the next Parliament, or the middle or late in the next Parliament.
It could be.
So it might be not until the following Parliament. It might be in the next Parliament at all then, might it?
It depends on when the economic conditions are met.
Huh?
I think everyone who is working on this matter hopes that the economic conditions can be met so that we can make a decision perhaps fairly early in the next Parliament, but it is too soon to know. Nobody's being evasive. You're asking me to give you an answer as to what the timescale will be, when no one can give you that answer, because we don't know how long it will take to meet those economic conditions.
No, I just wanted you to confirm, as you have done, as I understand it, that it is possible that there will not be a referendum in the next Parliament, assuming, of course, you're in power then, that there will not be a referendum in the next Parliament. It mightn't be until the one after that, so we could be 7, 8, 9 years away.
It's not impossible. I think it's unlikely, because people are working to try and get the right economic conditions, and because I suspect that as time goes on, more and more people in the business community looking at the impact on jobs, especially as the single currency really kind of takes off, I think more and more people may start to say this is something that we need to be in, because it's damaging our interests not to be in it.
Yeah.
So, but you really cannot tell. It's a matter of when the conditions are right.
Yeah, but you see, I remember Gordon Brown saying often, as you'll have heard as well, let's see how the thing beds down. You know, once it's up and running, that's going to change all our attitudes towards it. We'll see what happens, and it's not just a matter of us; it's a matter of them, and whether it looks as if it's working and all that. And then in the next Parliament, that's what they used to say, in the next Parliament we'll have a referendum. Now it's sort of slipping away a bit, isn't it? It's maybe in the Parliament after that.
No, I don't think so. I think all that's happening is that people are trying to speculate about what the date could be. I mean, our position is absolutely clear. It is that we think it's in Britain's long-term interests to join. We think that that will only be when the economic conditions are right and the conditions Gordon Brown has set are met, and we can't at the moment predict just when that will be. But I repeat, that is at least a sensible position. It's very different from the position being taken by any of the other parties, one of which wants us to go in immediately, no matter what harm it does. And the Conservatives, well, I mean, I don't know what they stand for, because they're MEPs, who after all are the people who will be exercising that power in the new European Parliament. They've signed up to a manifesto that says the single currency is the foundation stone of Europe and something on which we must build and develop in the future. And William Hague is telling us he's not going in for, what, 7 years, 10 years?
Well, which of course could be precisely the same as you, couldn't it? Because if I could characterise your approach, your position, as of this morning, it is, if I just finish the question, it is caution, extreme caution. We're on a sort of amber light, only it's amber with red rather than amber with green.
No, it's quite simply that when the conditions are right, we think it's in Britain's interests to go in. William Hague is saying even if it is in Britain's economic interests to go in, he's not going to go in for some arbitrary period of years. That seems to me to make no sense whatsoever.
On the wider European economic position, because not just the euro, of course, is it? The European Socialist Manifesto, which of course you, Robin Cook, wrote with somebody else from Europe, wants, and I quote, closer economic cooperation, not just coordination, not just the single currency we're talking about here now, is it? It's closer economic coordination across many areas.
Well, actually, there's again, a very common sense argument for that. I mean, everybody resents the fact that there are other member states who give particular tax breaks, say, to people in their community, and British business can't fight on a level playing field, despite the single market. It was a Tory government, after all, who signed us up to the single market. And to make a single market work, you've got to have a certain amount of common ground. Now, that doesn't mean everything being the same. I mean, again, we're not signing up to uniformity, but certainly it does argue for there being a sensible sort of band of policy approach.
And that band would include things, as we read in the Daily Mail, the lead story in the Mail on Sunday, rather, this morning. You're prepared to transfer more tax powers to Europe. They said specifically, they quoted the findings of a committee that had been chaired by one of your own ministers, which talked about the power to set 100 different taxes that might end up with Europe instead of with our lot.
Yes, I know about that Mail story. I'm afraid you know that there's something wrong with the story when it talks about a committee being secret that actually you've been boasting about and trying to get publicity for, because we actually think it's a great compliment it's chaired by a British minister for at least a year. As for the conclusions of the committee hasn't even reached conclusions. It hasn't even
Well, this is the agenda
yet.
It's working on, isn't it?
Well, no, I doubt it very much.
But you don't know. I mean, if it's secret, you wouldn't know, would you?
But it's not secret. I mean, I just pointed that out to you. So
well,
you know that a story that talks about a secret committee, which you've actually been trying to get publicity for, is starting, shall we say, on a not very sound ground. And the committee is not even due to report till the end of the year. But what that committee is working on is exactly what you were talking about a moment ago. It's saying, is there a degree of sensible cooperation or coordination? But also, in the Vienna summit, all the leaders of the European Union said that we are not talking about tax harmonisation, same tax rates and so on. There is nothing wrong with fair tax competition, and that's something that we all want to see.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because what your manifesto talks about is better policy coordination to prevent harmful tax competition in the form of unfair tax breaks and hidden subsidies. Now, that might very well encompass, therefore, handing these 100 different tax decisions across all sorts of areas over to Brussels. That would get rid of some of that harmful tax competition, wouldn't it?
John, you and many other people have known and have interviewed Gordon Brown for many years. Gordon is not a man to start giving away powers, particularly over taxation. And we're not talking, and no one in Europe at all is talking about the kind of uniform tax system that the Mail on Sunday is saying. What they are talking about is the fact that, yes, there are some unfair tax breaks. There is some unfair tax competition, and it's harming British companies. So it's in our interests to see if we can get agreement to move away from where there is unfair competition. But obviously, fair tax competition is something that might help us.
Now, whether or not you can persuade the voters of all of that in this election is one thing. Whether you can get your core vote in the Labour Party out to vote for you in the European elections is quite another. You don't need me to remind you of what happened in the local and the Welsh and Scottish elections, and Peter Hain who ran your campaign in Wales, said our message has been to the Middle England Daily Mail vote, not to the Daily Mirror vote, our traditional supporters. So you've got a problem here, because even Peter Hain sees that you're appealing not to your traditional supporters in the Labour Party, who you'd expect to come out and vote for you under normal circumstances, but to another group of people altogether.
No, what we're trying to do in Europe, as we do at home in Britain, is to work in the interests of everybody in the country, everybody in the different areas of the community. And what we are saying very clearly is that, as you said at the outset, these are important elections. The powers that will be exercised by the European Parliament are important powers. It really matters that we have good and effective people in the European Parliament who work in partnership with the Labour government, as they did, for example. Our MEPs were an enormous help when we were undertaking the recent negotiations on the structural funds, which mean that we've got an excellent deal, for example, for Cornwall for the first time ever, as well as for Scotland and for Wales. And we need the right partners to work with to get the best deal for Britain. And that's why it's so important. I mean, it's actually going to be a very, very simple electoral system. All people need to do is to go along, put their one cross for the team that they support, for the Labour team. We hope they will, for effective representation in the European Parliament. And so we hope that people will go. But we all recognise that not everybody gets excited about the European elections, but we'll try and make them so.
They may vote, as often they do in these elections, on other things as well that are in the back of their minds. I mean, they may well be disillusioned, as indeed 67 of your own backbench MPs were disillusioned with the way you're going about things, the welfare reform bill in that particular case. But, I mean, they may well be looking ahead to the asylum bill, which is causing, if we're to believe what we hear, even more concern on your backbenches. You might have an even bigger vote against that than you had against the welfare bill.
Well, we haven't got to the asylum bill. I mean, on the welfare bill, there's no doubt that everybody in the Labour Party is strongly in favour of the extra help that we're giving, help that the Conservatives never gave to people with the most severe disabilities. But there are some anxieties about whether we've got the balance right, about the relationship between when somebody has a disability, becomes ill, and their right to incapacity benefit, and how that system will work. And similarly with asylum, there are anxieties. But again, you know, John, you've put your finger on another area where actually it isn't really we. I mean, we are saying, yes, there can be abuse of asylum procedures, and indeed that we know that there is abuse by some criminal gangs. And we are going to try and get the balance right between giving real help to people who are genuinely in need and at risk, and stopping people from exploiting our willingness to give that help. Now, the Conservative MEPs have signed up to a manifesto that calls for a harmonisation of all laws on immigration and asylum policy across Europe, for an identical policy. I mean, we're not in favour of that. We are determined to have the right to our own policies. But whatever William Hague may say, his members in the European Parliament have signed up to something completely different.
I'm more concerned with what your backbenchers might say at this stage. It seems that you're going to delay the vote. You're the leader of the Conference, of course. You're going to delay the vote on that asylum bill until after the European elections, aren't you? Just in case there's
no, it isn't a matter
67
of
but 97 vote against this time.
It isn't a matter of delaying the vote. With all handling of legislation, I mean, we're getting a lot of legislation through the House.
Yeah, but it's not going to happen before the election, is it?
No, it's not likely that we will have that particular discussion next week, as it would probably have to be. But we will be having it as soon as we can, as soon as we think the bill is in sufficient shape.
At a safe time.
No, it's important to try and get legislation right. Nothing does more harm than badly drafted legislation which actually doesn't give effect to what any government is trying to do. We've done a lot of work on this subject. We've had special committees, taken extra evidence and so on, and we've had a lot of information and input, and we need to reflect that in the bill.
Margaret Becker, thanks very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
Later in the programme, we're going to be looking at whether the government's really going to sweep away the cobwebs of secrecy in Whitehall. But first, the NHS. It's always been a problem for the Conservatives because many voters have never been quite sure that they really believe in it. Labour did enormous damage with its charge that the Tories wanted to privatise the NHS, and they've never quite recovered from that. And in spite of the political dangers, many leading Conservatives are still looking to the private sector to find solutions to the problems, or some of the problems, the NHS faces. I'll be talking to the Shadow Health Secretary, Anne Widdecombe, after this report from Joanne Adler.
We are losing out by not encouraging the expansion of personal health care.
Universal funding by the taxpayer is essential.
Conservatives have collided over the direction of policy. Underfunding, staff shortages, waiting lists, doctors' working hours, nurses' pay, rationing. Today's problems in the NHS. Finding solutions is a daunting challenge for all parties, but for the Tories it's a particularly sensitive political issue.
In government, the Conservatives regularly increased state spending on health, but they were never able to shake off accusations that their real agenda was to privatise the NHS. In opposition, the party needs to regain trust and wants to develop new policies on health, but that's proving a difficult balance to strike. Deputy Leader Peter Lilly's recent efforts to distance the party from extending free market principles in health seems to contradict the direction of policies being developed by his own health team.
Ladies and gentlemen, Anne Widdecombe.
The party's charismatic health spokesman is respected for being a straight talker. She's frequently stressed her party's commitment to the NHS.
I want an NHS which is run according to the fundamental principles of the NHS. That it should be available to all, regardless of means.
Whilst also making it clear that her team is considering bold ideas for the extension of private provision.
We can either accept rationing, or we look for new and exciting ways to raise the totality of spending on health in this country. How do we do that? We do it by breaking down the Berlin walls between the public and the private sector.
This is not 1948. There are national health services around the world now, done on different models, run in different ways, and one has to say a large number of them now more effectively than is the case in Britain. And therefore we ought to learn from that, and if the Conservative Party doesn't do it, who will?
The party is acutely aware that health is its weak point. When William Hague launched his listening exercise last year, the first group of people he listened to were health professionals. And focus groups have told him the Conservatives lost the voters' trust on the public services, fearing Tories wanted more privatisation. So the deputy leader made the image problem his priority, insisting privatisation wasn't on the agenda for the public services.
Unless and until we are prepared to accept that there is more to life and more to conservatism than defending and extending the free market, we will always be on the intellectual back foot where the public services are concerned.
As I went round as Health Secretary, there were people around, and there were people who were particularly seeking to foster this impression, who believed that the Conservative Party wasn't committed to the health service. You could argue that our track record, both over 18 years and over, indeed, the 50-year history of the health service, ought to have spoken for itself, but it clearly didn't. And that's the weakness in our position in '97, which Peter, I think rightly, is saying to the party we now must address ahead of the next general election.
We will be serving in the tradition that Rab Butler so successfully...
But far from clarifying things, the message was only further obscured. The speech provoked uproar amongst those Conservatives who read it as an apology for Thatcherism and past market-inspired reforms.
It was an embarrassment to the health team. I'm sure Anne Widdecombe would be too loyal to say that. But I have no doubt that what they were trying to achieve was damaged by the furore over his speech. And it does not represent, in my view, mainstream Conservative thinking. I think the danger post the Lilly speech is that we might be seen to be frightened of daring to suggest anything that smacks of privatisation.
It's more likely that Lilly's efforts to put the brakes on promoting the private sector may only have given a temporary boost to supporters of the status quo.
Others believe the Conservatives must take advantage of opposition to harness radical thinking and develop a distinctive policy agenda. They point to innovations like this private GP service as a way in which private medicine is becoming more accessible and offering new ways to relieve the pressures on the NHS.
Patients here can walk in off the street and pay to see a doctor at their convenience. Right-wingers argue that as more people choose to pay for alternatives to the NHS, a trend is developing which policymakers must promote.
The over-the-counter drug market, the alternative medicine market and the walk-in on railway stations market is rather big. And the anecdotal evidence shows that that is across all classes. That isn't just a middle-class preference. Everybody knows that the rationing dilemma has become personal. It's not something the state can deal with. There has to be more money because new technology is on stream, the genomic revolution is coming, and people are demanding more, very properly. But there's no demand without a price. And sooner or later, we're going to have to take more responsibility for putting more money of our own into what we prefer to get.
John Spears, an uncompromising health specialist, advised Alan Duncan, Widdicombe's deputy, on his most recent speech, which cut to the main issue of contention. In practical terms, increasing private sector spending requires more people paying for private health insurance.
Most comparable countries spend more of their GDP in total on healthcare. Of that total, a greater proportion is spent via the personal sector. I suggest that we should consider the scope for using tax relief to encourage personal provision.
Even using the less contentious term personal in place of private, the meaning was clear. Tories in opposition have to bite the bullet and review the various options for private health insurance.
There's no service without a price. What people, I think, want is the guarantee of access to good services when they're ill. The answer is an insurance contract for each individual where the government transfers the money it presently spends and encourages people to add to it. Provided there's a moral minimum, there's going to have to be some compulsion, otherwise the 18-year-old boy who thinks he'll live forever won't be insured. There are some insurance systems that work. There are also things called medical savings accounts, which I think are well worth looking at. I mean, they're used in everywhere from Singapore to some new uses in some of the American states, for example. And what they do is they, based on the insurance principle underpinning them, they give the money, or they allow people to have tax-free accounts which they can use simply for medical care.
The Shadow Health team have clearly said they'll consider policies which would change the face of health provision. But the worry which haunts those who recall the problems of government is that such policies will claim more Tory casualties at the next election. Their prescription is review all possibilities, but don't undermine the egalitarian aims of the NHS.
In opposition, you must look at longer-term options, and then you focus in for the manifesto and say, we've considered that again, but we've decided the right way forward is, essentially, as I believe, supporting the National Health Service, but allowing people the freedom to have optional extras.
Either we become more efficient in what we're providing, and of course we're all going to do that, but there's a limit, I think, to efficiency savings, or we actually somehow put more money in to get more out. Now, that can only come from two sources. It either comes from your pocket via the government, i.e. through taxation, or it comes from your pockets by doing something else, by insuring for something else, or by having a top-up insurance policy, or by contributing directly in charges, or various ways like that. There are no ways around it. You can't get something for nothing. And I think people have to come to accept that we will need to pay more.
For Conservatives developing a new set of policies to take the party through to the next election, health is the biggest challenge. The key strategists here at the party's headquarters would love to follow their free market instincts, but they also fear making the party vulnerable to Labour attacks. A more explicit commitment to free market solutions in health and the public services would be a victory for those who argue that the Conservatives must use opposition to develop a distinct and radical alternative to New Labour.
there's no way that I can see that Anne Widdecombe and her team are going to be sidetracked from their purpose. And I think their purpose is to produce radical and sensible ideas as to how we go forward in healthcare. They believe, and I believe they're right, that health is a winnable issue for the Conservatives.
The party is in remission. Its policy-making core is stirring, and now it has to decide if it can improve its prospects for recovery by promoting a bigger role for the private sector in the public services.
Joanne Nadler reporting there. Anne Widdecombe, you say the NHS cannot do everything, even if you spend a bit more. So you want more of us to pay more towards our treatment. That's it in essence.
In essence, what I'm saying is that the NHS has never been able to do everything, but with the increasing amount of new medicine, new drugs, new surgery coming on stream, there is an ever-growing gap between what is demanded and what it can actually supply. And what I'm saying is that even though, of course, any future Conservative government will go on increasing spending in real terms, year on year. Of course we'll do that, there's no doubt about that at all. Yet even that will not be enough. And even if there were to be, under any government, a substantial tax increase, that still would not be enough. Now, once you've accepted that, and the evidence screams at you that that is so, with people not able to get beta interferon and so on, once you have accepted that that is so, then you really have a choice. You either accept increased rationing, because you're so committed to doing things the way we've always done them, that you'd rather accept increased rationing than do anything new. Or you say, we've got to look at new ways to get money in on top of that extra spending which the government will put in. So it's not a substitute. You're not saying farm out what you do. You're saying let's look at ways of getting additional monies in so that we can do more.
Which means more of us paying more out of our own pockets.
That is one option, if by that what you mean is more people taking out individual medical insurance. There are other options. For example, employers insuring, maybe even self-insuring their workforce. Getting money in from the private sector itself through the private finance initiative or through partnerships.
In addition to buildings, that is. I mean, we're not talking now just about putting up the hospital.
Well, we already do buildings.
Precisely. So
in addition to buildings, getting the private sector to put its own money in, for example, in one or two places, but not enough. The private sector has supplied a scanner. It has paid for the scanner. Both sectors use it. Now, the NHS quite clearly is using a scanner that it hasn't paid for. It's that sort of plus. If you have, as everybody knows, take one that everybody's familiar with, if you have a private ward in an NHS hospital, that actually brings income into the health service, which the health service can then use and spend. So there are all sorts of ways. I think there is a danger, and I think we saw that in just looking at those Vox Pops that you've done, or Vox or whatever, experts that you've done. I think there is a danger because it's the way we've always done it in this country, and we can't look wider, of simply saying that private medicine equals blogs taking out an insurance premium. That is a part of it, but it's not the whole of it. And above all, I can't stress enough, this is additional, it's not substitute.
Those medical savings accounts that we heard about, you've got another expression for that.
We're looking at what we call health tessers.
Health tessers?
Yes, I stress again, we're only looking at them. We haven't, it's certainly not policy at the moment. We're looking at a whole range of things.
What does it mean, a health tesser?
Well, everybody knows how a tesser works. I mean, one of the nice things is trying to get something that is familiar to people. And the idea would be, might be, it's not policy, might be, that you save, and the savings are dedicated specifically towards medical care and services as and when you need them. The beauty of it is, of course, that if you don't need them, then you can take the money at the end of it. So that is just one of umpteen, and I stress umpteen possibilities. I don't want everybody to run away and say this is what the Tory party is going to do. We are still looking.
But why should we do that, for instance, when we're paying our taxes, we expect the NHS to provide?
Well, of course, all the examples of trying to get people to take more responsibility for their own health probably involve some measure of tax relief other than actually getting private sector money into the NHS, which I'm very keen on as quite a big blockway of getting money in. The question is simply this: if you accept that the NHS can't do it all, then you've got to accept that we must have proper partnerships, we must have other ways of doing things. If the NHS were doing it all, nobody at the moment would be taking out any form of private medical insurance, because you would say, well, it doesn't matter, the NHS does the whole thing. It never has been able to. And everybody out there knows that there is a huge gap between demand and supply that is not going to be bridged just by carrying on the way we are.
But we'd have to have, as you say, there would have to be incentives to encourage us to take more responsibility for our own healthcare.
I think it would be very difficult to persuade people just simply to go and take more responsibility without offering them incentives. And what we have to look at is what those incentives will deliver. It's no good saying vaguely, let's have an incentive. I want to know the likely result of that incentive, what it's going to cost, how many extra people it's going to bring in, bearing in mind that it might only otherwise benefit people who are already taking out private medical insurance. No point in that. It's got to be an incentive that has a real and measurable effect. And that is why, although everybody's clamouring to know exactly what we're going to do, we're examining so many different options, trying to crunch the figures, trying to come up with what is effective.
Because at the moment, people want a funny noise somewhere around there. We'll assume that this whole set isn't going to blow up. At the moment, people buy insurance, private insurance, because they want a better service. They want to go in to be treated when they want to be treated. They want to have a nice fancy private ward or champagne for dinner or whatever it happens to be. I mean, that is itself an incentive. Now, it's difficult to see, apart from a very substantial, serious tax incentive, why, unless that's what they're after, people should bother with it.
Well, the very fact that at the moment they do bother with it, the very fact that at the moment the NHS does use the private sector, it does it on a very limited scale, but if you take the waiting lists initiative, a lot of the waiting lists initiative at the moment is being delivered by the private sector for the NHS under contract. Now, one of the things that we do get very tied up, as I've just said, on blogs taking out an insurance policy. That's just one portion.
Big one, though.
Not necessarily. I mean, I think the single biggest improvement that we could bring about is actually getting private sector money in by contracting at favourable rates. Now, fund holding was doing that. Fund holding was doing a very great deal of buying services from the private sector at very favourable rates and therefore releasing money that can be spent to treat more patients.
But that's not new money, is it? I mean, if a fund holder says...
but he's getting more for it. That is the point.
He might be getting a bit more for it, but it's not actually new money
gross that up.
coming in.
If you gross that up and people getting more for the money which the NHS is spending, that makes a substantial contribution. But you're right, that again, like blogs and his insurance premium, is only a part. But if you get a very large partnership going, whereby the private sector is committing quite substantial funds into that partnership, then you're starting to make progress. We're looking at such a range, but at the core of this always, and I must stress it, at the core of this always, is that we will go on expanding the public sector at the same time. There is no question of hiving off responsibilities onto the private sector.
But at the moment, just to go back to the private insurance thing, at the moment it's, 6.5 million people or thereabouts covered by private insurance. You would be happy to see that spread, that figure to grow?
They already do, for example, 20% of all acute elective surgery. That's things like hips, cataracts, those sorts of things. They already do 20% of that. I am quite happy to see that grow, because what we know is that they do that well, that they do it so well that the NHS itself contracts with them. And what I would like to see is a growth there, because, to put it very crudely, the more the private sector does, the more free the NHS is to do the things that it does not do at this moment, because what is being ignored in this discussion we're having, we talk about rationing as if it's some great theoretical thing.
Politicians are normally terrified to talk about rationing.
Well, I'm not.
They won't use the word.
I use it all the
I've never
time.
yet met an NS Secretary of State for Health who even uses the word.
Well, you're looking at a shadow one that's used it ever since her appointment. But can I just put rationing in context? What rationing means is that we have a 3-tier health service in this country. And on the top tier are those who get their NHS treatment or who choose to go private quite voluntarily. On the next tier down are those who can't get their NHS treatment, either because the operations or the drugs aren't available or the delays are too enormous. And they don't choose to go private, but they can, often at huge personal cost. I mean, we have got people in this country selling houses in order to buy beta interferon. But on the third tier are people who don't get their NHS treatment, and they couldn't go private if they didn't eat. Now, those people are totally dispossessed under this system. And what I'm saying is that if we can share the burden more, the NHS can reach out towards those dispossessed people and do more than it is doing at the moment.
But there's... that clearly is a possibility. Well, yeah, but the danger in more people going private And ultimately, I mean, there's no reason, according to your logic, there's no reason why half the population, for instance, shouldn't take out some sort of private medical insurance. You wouldn't have a problem with that, would you?
I think it's a somewhat exaggerated aim, but let's take it for theoretical purposes.
But it's theoretical. You would then end up with the NHS in danger of becoming a kind of safety net service for those who couldn't afford it.
No, and I see exactly why you're saying that, and that is why I have said right from the start that we don't want to hive off responsibilities, we want to share, but we want to go on expanding in the public sector. We want to go on expanding year on year. What I'm saying is that itself won't be enough, but it will always be there, a big, thriving National Health Service that can do ever more and more. I don't want it to become a safety net service. I know that there are some theorists who say that would be a good idea. I think actually it would be a very bad idea. What I want is a true partnership. It's both sectors doing most things. I think there are some things that at the moment the private sector cannot do.
But the danger of what you're suggesting is that you may not want this to happen, but the danger is that, let's assume you do have half, not necessarily half the entire population. OK, but let's say half the middle class, or 60% of the middle class, entirely possible, that is, because an awful lot of them already do private health insurance. They will stop, forgive me for using the word because it's what your political opponents used to use, stakeholders. They will stop becoming stakeholders in the NHS. Then you have a real problem on your hands.
They won't. We're all stakeholders. Because
if you're paying privately.
Because we all still pay our taxes. Even if you get some relief, you all still pay large quantities of taxes. But B, we all use the NHS. Because the fact is that we all depend very heavily on the NHS indeed for accident and emergency services. Most people still use the NHS at primary care level. If you actually look at where the private sector has developed, it does 20% of the sort of elective surgery I was discussing, hips, eyes, things like that. It does a third of all mental health care. It does 85% of all elderly care. So it's developed in specific areas, and there are other areas where we assume that the NHS is the first port of call and where it must be excellent. For example, we will be in a very bad way indeed if we don't have an excellent and expandingly excellent accident and emergency service, which you and I use. Doesn't matter how insured we are, if we go out there and drop down with a heart attack, you and I have a stake in the NHS having a first-class, excellent service. No reason, though, why, if we have a sufficiently expanded private sector, they shouldn't do that sort of stuff as well. And then it would expand to the extent where, you know, we drop down in the street or something, or not in my car, you get taken, because you've got your private health thing, you just get taken to your private hospital. No, these are fantasies, because this is not what I'm working towards. That would be so if what I had said right at the start was I want the private sector to take more and more of what the NHS does and to shrink the NHS. In fact, what I've said is the exact opposite. I've said I want to go on expanding the NHS, but that won't be enough, and I need an addition on top of that. And it's to private monies, whether it be from an individual, an employer, or the private sector itself, that I'm looking for the addition. I still have a vision of a huge and expanding health service. Right, but the question is how much expanding? Why don't you, instead of saying private partnership and all that, why don't you say, let's do what the Germans and the French do. Let's spend substantially more, not just another penny in the pound or tuppence or threepence on the pound, a third more, as they do. They spend a third more than we do on their national health service. Have you analysed it? Let's do that. Have you analysed it? When you look, and you've now hit, I think inadvertently, the whole nub of the problem. Because when you look across OECD, even if you exclude America, which has a huge private model, in case you think I'm pulling a fast one, let's exclude America. If you look across the developed world, what you actually see is that, yes, there is a difference between what we spend and they spend, but nearly all of that difference is made up not by public spending, but by private spending. That is the essence of our problem. I'd love to argue that with you. No, it's there. It's there in all the independent OECD statistics. Well, that is the essence of our problem. They do spend more GDP, and the difference is the private addition. Anne Whittaker, must end it there. Thank you very much indeed. Tomorrow, the government will publish its proposals for giving us access to more information. So, in theory, we'll be able to find out in future just what is in those ministerial red boxes. In theory. In reality, as Terry Dignan reports, it may instead be a case of them telling us only what they think we ought to know.
In the heart of London, a stone's throw from the Thames, lies Whitehall. In these stately buildings, government ministers and their civil servants make decisions about every aspect of our lives. Even after devolution, what goes on in the corridors of power affects all of the United Kingdom. In opposition, Labour complained that Whitehall's control of information allowed ministers to evade scrutiny of their actions. Here at the Home Office, Jack Straw believes his Freedom of Information Bill will mark an end to a culture of secrecy in Whitehall. But campaigners for freedom of information fear the legislation will not match his rhetoric, and an opportunity to make government much more accountable will have been lost. You can find the campaign for freedom of information on the first floor of an office building just 2 miles from Whitehall. Run by Maurice Frankel, he and his allies in Parliament are clear about what would be in an ideal freedom of information bill.
It will give individuals greater rights to find out what government and public bodies hold about them and their families on files.
I hope that by publishing the bill and by putting it through the House of Commons, we are going to see a new attitude towards freedom of information.
It will give people rights to information about developments affecting their communities, whether it is the closure of a school or of a hospital or of the building of a new road.
Public information is a right that people have a right to know, rather than the old prevailing view that government information is the intellectual property of the government and should be released with caution and only at the discretion of government.
It will help to keep the government and public bodies under proper scrutiny. It will improve their accountability by ensuring that they're not able to suppress inconvenient information and only release the information which shows their policies in the best possible light.
MPs are bound to compare the bill with this, the government's original proposals for freedom of information, published only months after Labour came to power. Entitled Your Right to Know, the document was welcomed enthusiastically by supporters of open government. But Jack Straw was said to be deeply opposed to some of its most important recommendations. As a so-called white paper, Your Right to Know was treated as serious evidence of Labour's intent. It said ministers and civil servants could refuse to release information only if it caused substantial harm. It looks as if the government has had second thoughts. It's now being said the bill will only allow information to be published if it does not prejudice the government. There are concerns this could mean whatever ministers want it to mean.
That's a weaker test. It will make it easier for government and public bodies to withhold information from us, and it would allow a lot more information to be withheld than the white paper envisaged.
I would be worried because substantial harm or harm are quite clear, concrete tests. If we are moving to other expressions, words like prejudice, not being a lawyer, I'm not quite sure what that means in legal terms, but to me it has a less substantial and more abstract quality to it, and I would be looking for a substantial harm test.
A vicious civil war in West Africa soon tested Labour's commitment to openness. Last year, Labour ministers came under pressure over how much they knew about the supply of arms to Sierra Leone. Some MPs worry the bill may not make it any easier to get hold of this kind of information.
The whole Sierra Leone sand line affair was a mess because there was a combination of secrecy, cover-up, lack of candour, desire not to disclose information to Parliament. Parliament actually overcame that, but at a very heavy price and after a long time. I think the burden should be placed upon those who wish to resist the disclosure of information, of daylight coming in on their decisions. The burden should be on them to show that there's an overriding, substantial harm which would come through disclosure.
But behind the scenes, the White Paper's opponents have been winning. The document said civil servants' advice to ministers could be published if it caused no harm. Ministers now say advice will remain secret. Some MPs believe they won't even be able to see background information.
There's an awful lot of information available which goes into the decisions taken by ministers as to what their priorities should be. The roads programme, for instance, what the environmental impact is of some initiatives by government or other agencies.
Thrust into the media spotlight as one of the new Labour ministers in the Department for Culture, Mark Fisher learned what he'd always suspected, that much of the information in advice to ministers could be revealed.
It confirmed most of what I'd thought about government. The government in this country has been too cautious, too long, and it doesn't actually benefit government. I think you get better government by opening up the thought processes and the options that are available to you.
But the world of Whitehall is no longer completely shrouded. In office, the Tories relaxed the controls on official information. Their code of practice permitted the release of advice if it caused no harm. Could Labour be replacing the code with a weaker measure?
It would be a real disappointment if the Freedom of Information Bill was not substantially better than the code of practice introduced by the Conservatives. I think people will say, well, what is this great reform that Labour has been promising for 25 years? What is this reform which Tony Blair said would completely change the way in which politics was done?
The government's response to the Macpherson inquiry into the Stephen Lawrence murder proves it does take freedom of information seriously, says Jack Straw. Unlike the White Paper, the bill will extend to the police. But the information that really matters about police investigations won't be revealed.
I think it's incumbent upon the Home Secretary to adopt this particular recommendation fully and without watering it down. If he doesn't, then I think he will have let the Lawrences down, he will have let the Macpherson and the whole inquiry down. That lack of confidence could be completely taken away if the Freedom of Information Act covered the police in its whole range of activities. And we won't have the situation now that we have where many clients come to me and say, look, something went wrong in this investigation. I want a judicial inquiry or public inquiry. I want to take the police to court.
Well, but the first thing really is to consider the safety and the well-being of the people who have helped police to make any inquiries and pursue an investigation. If it becomes common knowledge that the person who has spoken to police is having their details made available to others, then clearly that person may feel very much at risk. And not only that person, but others will be disinclined to come forward in the future to help us.
The Home Office says the bill will force councils, schools, hospitals and other public bodies to release more information to justify their decisions. But many people also want to know what the government is up to. Having earlier promised to expose the innermost workings of Whitehall to public scrutiny, 2 years after coming to power, Labour appears to have changed its mind.
If what we're getting is some greater access to personal files and greater access to local community information, very important, but not putting real pressure on government itself to be accountable for its decisions. I think the accusation then would be that the government was going to be allowed to get away with the kind of things that its predecessor had been able to get away with.
The word in Whitehall is that Jack Straw has triumphed over Lord Chancellor Derry Irvine, the main architect of the White Paper on freedom of information. Yet Straw's bill will be in the form of draft legislation, so it'll be scrutinised by MPs for signs of weakness.
The White Paper was a superb White Paper. The legislation which is going to be announced this week is going to be 300% better than nothing. But I think there's a danger of the White Paper nevertheless having been watered down.
We are going to have freedom of information legislation in this country. That's to the credit of the government. But now we've got to ensure that it is the best possible and the toughest possible freedom of information regime. It ought to be the best because we're coming late to this field and it's up to both government working with Parliament to ensure that it is.
Parliament awaits the publication of Jack Straw's bill. It promises a new era of openness in Whitehall. But campaigners for freedom of information fear that if Labour MPs don't improve the bill, the best ever chance to cast more light on the work of government will have passed by.
Terry Dignan reporting there. By the way, we did ask the Home Office if they wanted anybody to respond to that report, but they said no. That's it for this week. Until next week, good afternoon.
one new message. Did you know you might be risking the following? Radiation exposure, changes in brain function, tumours from your mobile phone. You have no more messages.
Panorama, the mobile mystery, tomorrow at 10:05 on BBC One.
The first time in my life I feel really happy.
Well, misunderstandings can happen. Look, I know what I saw. Now get out.
My relationship with Mike is great.
If he's playing both sides of the fence, you've got to tell Libby and take your chances.
I trust him more than anyone.
You are unbelievable. I take that as a compliment. Don't. Take it as a warning.
I just wish people wouldn't get involved.
Mike, he needs a good smack in the mouth.
Don't miss Neighbours, Tuesday 1:40 and 5:35 on BBC One.
I couldn't imagine being without him.
A less than smooth journey and the worst blizzard in years for Burt Lancaster and Dean Martin in BBC One's Sunday movie, Airport at 2:20. First here on BBC One, a lesson in stress management for Matthew.